The moment I stepped into the private room at the back of the restaurant, I knew this wasn't the casual family brunch my mom had promised. The lights were too bright, the table too clean, and there was a thick stack of paperwork sitting in the middle next to a pen that wasn't mine. I felt my throat tighten as I noticed the man in a suit already seated, laptop open, eyes on me instead of the menu. My mom smiled like this was all normal and said we just needed to talk about what is fair after my dad's death. I am Sarah, 28. I work remote in tech and I know enough about contracts and online banking to recognize a setup when I see one. Still, nothing prepared me for hearing that this stranger was her lawyer and that the papers in front of me were drafted to redistribute my inheritance so everyone could share. He slid the agreement across the table. My mom folded her hands like a judge, and the rest of the people in the room stared at me as if I was already guilty of something. He said all I had to do was sign and transfer most of what my dad left me for the good of the family. When I refused, the tone changed. The smiles disappeared. They started hinting at dragging me into court, ruining my credit, making this very hard for me if I did not cooperate. My heart was pounding, but I could feel my dad's voice in the back of my mind, reminding me who actually had the law on their side. I looked around the table, counting slowly under my breath, then out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You are a lot of people. They frowned confused, and that is when I smiled for the first time that day. Funny thing is I said I only brought one person too. If you want to know who walked in after that and how this little family meeting turned into the worst decision my mom ever made, keep listening until the end. I was not always the girl sitting in a private room across from a lawyer, counting people like they were chess pieces. For most of my life, I was just a kid from a quiet suburb in San Diego who thought family meant game nights, Costco runs, and my dad's terrible jokes about JavaScript. My dad, Richard, was a software engineer at a small tech company. He was the kind of guy who packed leftovers for lunch and drove the same old Honda for years because it still works. My mom, Laura, hated that. She wanted the house in the gated community, the new hybrid parked in the driveway, the Instagram vacations that made everyone else jealous. When I was 15, the gap between them finally split open. I still remember the night they sat me down at the kitchen table. My dad had a stack of printed bank statements. My mom had a Pinterest board of vacation homes open on her tablet. She told me she was tired of just getting by. He told her he was tired of pretending they could afford a life they didn't have. California is a community property state, which basically meant the court looked at everything they had built together and sliced it down the middle. My mom saw it as a chance to finally upgrade her life. My dad saw it as losing half of everything he had worked for and somehow still being responsible for alimony and child support. After the divorce, I stayed mostly with my dad in a modest condo near Carlsbad. It was nothing fancy, but I could hear the ocean if I opened my bedroom window at night. On Fridays, he would let me pick dinner from DoorDash, and we would eat tacos straight from the containers while watching Netflix on the couch. He showed me how to use budgeting apps, explained what a 401k was, and why credit scores mattered more than designer bags. While other kids' parents bragged about new cars, my dad bragged about paying off his credit card every month. My mom, on the other hand, moved up the coast to Orange County and seemed to reinvent herself overnight. She married Victor, a charming real estate agent who specialized in selling homes that looked like something out of a TV show. Suddenly, her Facebook was full of photos from backyard barbecues and wine tastings. She had 2 new kids in her life, Mia and Ethan, and they all wore matching outfits in their Christmas photos. I was technically still her daughter, but most days I felt like a guest star in the perfect family she was trying to build. Every time I scrolled past her posts, it was the same thing. So proud of my amazing family. Blessed living my best life. I was never in the pictures. She didn't call to ask how my exams went or what I wanted to do after high school. She called to tell me Mia had made varsity or Ethan had won some tournament. The only time my name came up was when she complained to my dad about money. My dad would come home from those conversations a little quieter, a little more tired, but he always bounced back by turning on some old movie and making popcorn on the stove. On weekends, we went hiking in the local canyons or drove up the coast for cheap day trips. He'd point out houses on the cliffs and say, people get obsessed with these, but they still go to bed with the same problems as everyone else. He kept our life simple, but it felt honest. At night, when I worried that I was somehow the reason everything fell apart, he would sit at the edge of my bed and tell me, you don't owe anyone your future just because they share your last name. Build something real, something that belongs to you. Those words sounded dramatic back then, like something a movie dad would say. I didn't know he was quietly meeting with a lawyer, updating paperwork, making sure that if anything ever happened to him, I wouldn't be at the mercy of my mother's idea of fair. I thought the worst part of my life was already behind me when the divorce was finalized and everyone moved on. I had no idea that one late-night drive on the I-5 years later would take my dad away and turn those quiet money lessons into a full-blown war over everything he left me. When you grow up with a dad who double-checks every seatbelt and reroutes around traffic just to be safe, you never think car accident is how his story ends, but that is exactly what happened. One rainy Tuesday night, he was driving back down the I-5 after staying late at the office to finish a release. A drowsy driver drifted across lanes. There was a chain reaction, and by the time the highway patrol called me, my dad was already gone. The world went silent in that way it does when someone pulls the plug on your entire life. The funeral was small and simple, just like he would have wanted. A few co-workers from his tech company, a couple of neighbors from the condo building, and me standing there trying to breathe around the knot in my chest. My mom showed up dressed in black like a movie widow. Victor at her side, Mia and Ethan standing a little behind them like props. She cried loudly enough for everyone to hear, hugging people she had barely spoken to in years, telling anyone who would listen how heartbroken she was. I stood next to his urn, thinking, you didn't love this man. You loved the life he could not give you. After the service, while people were still drifting toward the parking lot, a woman in a navy blazer and practical heels approached me. She introduced herself as Elena, my dad's attorney. We sat at a metal picnic table outside the church, the air thick with the smell of flowers and coffee. She explained that my dad had been very thorough, that he had updated his will more than once after the divorce, that he had been concerned about potential pressure from my mother. That was her polite way of saying he knew my mom would come for his money the second he was gone. According to the will, everything that was unquestionably his separate property after the divorce, plus the assets he'd built since, came to me. The condo in Carlsbad, his tech stocks, some Apple, some index funds, his IRA and 401k rollovers. It was not billionaire money, but it was the careful, solid wealth of a man who had spent his whole life being responsible. I should have felt guilty hearing that it all went to me. Instead, I just felt sad and weirdly proud, like he had managed to protect me even from beyond the grave. Elena told me about the California probate process, how the court would basically validate the will, oversee the transfer of assets, make sure no one could challenge it without real grounds. She looked me in the eye and said, "Your father was very clear, Sarah. He wanted you to have control of your future without interference." The word interference hung in the air like a storm cloud, and right on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. A long paragraph about how we need to talk, how your father would want you to think about the whole family, how we should handle his estate like adults. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She asked when we could discuss numbers. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I answered politely, said we could talk after probate was underway, mentioned that Dad had an attorney. She ignored that part and went straight to asking rough estimates of what he had left, like she was pricing a listing. When I didn't respond quickly enough, the guilt tripping started. She reminded me of all the times she had taken care of me when I was a kid. How expensive my teenage years were. How Mia and Ethan needed help with college. It was always the same phrase on repeat. You have to think about the family. What she meant was her new family. I forwarded the messages to Elena. She told me not to share specific balances or documents, not to sign anything, not to agree to any private deals. She said that if my mom wanted to challenge the will, she could hire her own lawyer and file in court. But based on the paperwork my dad had prepared, it would be a long shot. I decided to trust the woman my dad had trusted, even if it meant disappointing the woman who gave birth to me. That is when my mom's tone shifted from emotional manipulation to mild threats. She started leaving voicemails about how lawyers were expensive, how this could drag on for years, how my credit could be affected if there was a messy legal fight. She would sprinkle in something sentimental like, "I'm just trying to look out for you," before sliding into, "You don't want this to get ugly, do you?" It was like listening to a sales pitch wrapped in a Hallmark card. The more I held my ground, the more desperate she sounded. I stopped answering her calls and wrote everything down. Dates, times, what she said. My dad had taught me that money fights make people reckless and reckless people leave evidence. A few weeks after the funeral, probate officially confirmed the will. The condo, the accounts, everything moved into my name. Elena sent me a neat folder with legal copies and a calm email about next steps. Within 24 hours, my mom emailed me, too. The subject line was family meeting, and the body was full of phrases like clear the air, discuss options, and find a fair solution. She said it would just be us, a small group, nothing formal. She suggested a nice restaurant in Irvine, said she would make a reservation in a private room so we could talk openly. I stared at the email for a long time, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. My dad had done everything right, followed every rule, and somehow I still felt like prey being invited to walk calmly into a trap. I forwarded the email to Elalina with one simple question. Will you come with me? Elalina didn't even hesitate. She called me instead of replying by email, her voice steady in a way that made my shoulders finally drop a little. She said she would be there, that I was not going to walk into any meeting alone, and that if my mother wanted to play games with legal documents, she had picked the wrong opponent. The day of the family meeting, I drove up to Iran with a knot in my stomach and a folder in my bag. Inside were copies of the will, the probate confirmation, and a notepad where I had written dates and summaries of every voicemail and guilt-soaked text my mother had sent since the funeral. It was my little shield of paper against years of being told I was ungrateful whenever I didn't roll over. We agreed on a simple plan. I would go in first, see who was there, see what they put on the table. Elna would wait nearby and come in when I texted her. That way, my mom wouldn't have the chance to spin it as an ambush, even though that was exactly what she had planned for me. The restaurant was the kind of place with awkwardly quiet music and water glasses that never seemed to empty. A hostess led me past couples on dates and business lunches to the back, where a frosted glass door marked private was already closed. My heart thudded against my ribs as she opened it, and I stepped into the room I had described when the story began. My mom sat at the head of the table in a black blouse, posture perfect, like she was chairing a board meeting. Victor sat to her right in a blazer that looked expensive, but a little too tight, as if he had grown into a different version of himself than the one who bought it. Mia and Ethan were there, too. On the opposite side of the table, next to a man in a grey suit with a sleek laptop open in front of him. No one had menus. There was a picture of water, a neat stack of papers, and a pen aligned perfectly on top. Sarah, you made it, my mom said as if I had shown up early to help decorate for a party. We just want to talk. The man in the suit stood up and offered his hand. He introduced himself as Daniel, an attorney. Helping the family explore options regarding your father's estate. The way he said family made it sound like everyone in the room had lost the same thing I had, like we were all equals here, just trying to divvy up grief. I sat down slowly and noticed the top page of the stack in front of me. It had my name on it and more legal language than any normal person would voluntarily read over brunch. Terms like redistribution, voluntary agreement, and irrevocable. My stomach flipped. Before you panic, my mom said, leaning forward with a practiced sympathetic look. We just want to make sure everyone is provided for. Your father's will didn't consider the reality of the family. Now things are different. She gestured to Mia and Ethan as if they were line items in a budget. College is expensive. Life is expensive. This is just about fairness. Daniel took over, explaining that the document was a family settlement agreement that would allow me to transfer a reasonable portion of the inheritance into a shared trust. Reasonable, according to the numbers printed in stark black ink, meant about 65%. He said it in the same tone someone might use to suggest splitting a check. I kept my face neutral, but inside I could feel heat rising. My dad had worked overtime, driven that damn I-5 at night, skipped vacations for years, and now I was being told that honoring his choices was selfish. No one is trying to take anything from you, my mom added, which was almost funny considering the contract literally existed to take things from me. We just don't want this to become a long, ugly legal fight. That would hurt your credit, your future. This way, we handle it privately, like adults. I thought about the texts she had sent, the voicemails where her voice sharpened whenever she said the word fair. I thought about my dad sitting at the edge of my bed telling me I didn't owe anyone my future. I took a breath. So, I said carefully, if I don't sign this, what happens? The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Victor shifted in his seat. Mia stared at the table. Ethan kept looking at his phone like he wished he was anywhere else. Daniel folded his hands and gave me a look that might have been meant to pass for kind. Then this could become complicated. He said your mother could contest certain aspects of the probate. There could be long delays, legal fees, public records. It might impact your credit or your ability to move quickly with the assets. Conflict is stressful. We're trying to avoid that. My mom jumped back in, her voice tightening just enough to slip the mask. We're giving you a chance to show you care about this family. You're not the only one who lost something, Sarah. Mia is applying to colleges. Ethan has his whole future ahead of him. We are asking you to do the right thing. I looked at each of them. The lawyer ready to bill by the hour. Victor, who had married into my mother's hunger for status, 2 teenagers who had grown up in a world where I was a footnote, and my mother, who could cry on command and talk about love while pushing a pen toward my hand. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but my voice came out calm. How many of you are there again? I asked softly, mostly to myself at first. My mom frowned. What does that have to do with anything? I let my gaze slide around the table as if I was counting place settings. 1, I said, nodding toward my mom. 2, to Victor. 3. 4. For Mia and Ethan. I paused on Daniel. 5. The room went quiet except for the low hum of the restaurant outside the door. You are a lot of people, I said finally, meeting my mom's eyes. Confusion flickered across her face, then irritation. Sarah, this isn't a joke. I smiled, and for the first time since I walked in, I felt something other than fear. I felt ready. You're right, I said. It's not. I reached down, pulled my phone from my bag, and tapped out a single word I had already typed into a draft before I arrived. Then I set the phone face down next to the untouched pen. Funny thing is, I added, I only brought one person, too. A soft knock sounded on the door a few seconds later, sharp and precise. The hostess opened it just enough to let a woman in a navy blazer step through, a familiar folder in her hand, and a calm, professional smile on her face. Hi, Laura, Elena said politely. I hear you wanted to talk about Sarah's inheritance. After that meeting, my mom stopped pretending to be hurt and started acting like someone who had just lost a bid on a very expensive house. She walked out of the restaurant stiff and silent. Victor at her elbow, her lawyer mumbling something about revisiting options. Elena and I stayed behind for a few minutes, just long enough for my hands to stop shaking. She told me I had handled it exactly right, that I had every legal right to say no, and that if my mother tried anything else, we would deal with it. I wanted to believe that was the end of it. For about 3 days, my phone was quiet. No guilt-tripping texts, no long voicemails. I almost let myself think maybe the shock of having a real attorney walk in had scared my mom straight. Then the messages started again, but colder this time. She sent a long text about how disappointed she was, how ashamed my father would be, how money has changed you. She hinted that if I kept being stubborn, I might regret how complicated things could get with accounts and paperwork. It did not sound like a threat of more brunch meetings. It sounded like a warning from someone who had finally accepted she could not get what she wanted by asking nicely. I forwarded everything to Elena. She told me to keep every message and not respond. Then she added something that made my stomach twist. If she can't move you emotionally, she might try to move you financially. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop open and went through every account I had. I changed passwords, turned on 2-factor authentication for my bank and investment apps, checked security questions, and froze my credit with the 3 major bureaus. It was the grown-up version of barricading the door, one app notification at a time. My dad used to say, in this country, your data is worth more than the cash in your wallet. I never really felt the weight of that until I was clicking through settings with my heart pounding, imagining my mother whispering my childhood address and first pet's name into some login screen. A few days later, I got an email that looked exactly like the kind my bank usually sent. Same logo, same colors, same subject line template. Important action required. The only reason I hesitated before clicking was because the timing felt wrong. I had just updated my security and the universe is rarely that on the nose. I hovered over the link instead of tapping it. The URL was close but not quite right. The kind of fake domain you only notice if you are already suspicious. My skin went cold. Someone had not just guessed my bank. They had paid attention. I called the bank directly using the number on the back of my card. They confirmed they had not sent any security emails that week and there had been at least one failed login attempt from an unfamiliar device on one of my investment accounts. The representative helped me lock everything down even further, then told me to file a report with local law enforcement and the bank's fraud department. It felt surreal to sit in my small living room. Netflix paused on some dumb sitcom while I explained to a detective over the phone that my own mother might be trying to fish her way into my inheritance. He suggested I also submit a complaint through the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3. It sounded intense, like something people did when strangers overseas stole their crypto, not when their mom lived an hour up the freeway. Still, I filled out the form, attached screenshots, emails, and the bank's notes about failed login. Elena reviewed everything and told me I did the right thing. If this escalates, she said, you'll want a clear trail that shows you didn't just imagine this. The next step was protecting the one thing I had never really thought about as part of my security, my actual front door. I ordered a Ring doorbell camera and a couple of small security cameras during my lunch break one day. The way some people impulse buy shoes. They arrived 2 days later in cheerful cardboard boxes. Installing them made me feel ridiculous and empowered at the same time. I walked around the condo with my phone, checking angles, making sure every door and the area near the building's mailbox were in view. It felt dramatic until I imagined my mom leaning over my mailbox or sitting in her car out front, connecting to my building's guest Wi-Fi and pretending the internet itself owed her a cut. For a little while, nothing happened. The cameras sent me notifications when the mail carrier came or when my neighbor dragged his trash cans past my door, but that was it. I went back to my normal routine. Remote work, yoga videos on YouTube, late night scrolling on Reddit. One night, unable to sleep, I posted a long anonymized version of my situation on our legal advice. I changed names and locations, but I told the truth about the inheritance, the pressure, the fake family meeting, the weird bank email. The comments flooded in. People told me to listen to my attorney, not to meet my mother alone, to keep everything in writing, to treat this like a crime, not a misunderstanding. A few even admitted they had gone through similar things when a parent died and money was involved. Reading those stories made me feel less crazy and more focused. I was not overreacting. I was responding. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was in a Zoom stand-up, my phone buzzed with a Ring alert. Someone was in front of my building. I glanced at the thumbnail and saw a car I recognized from years of school pickups. Victor's SUV. My chest tightened. I turned my camera off on Zoom, pretending I was having connection issues, and opened the live feed. Victor was parked at the curb, engine idling. He had his laptop open on his knees, the glow of the screen lighting up his face. A second later, another notification popped up. Motion detected near the mailboxes. The second camera showed my mom standing there, phone pressed to her ear, glancing around like she was checking if anyone was watching. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the tiny audio feed. I watched my mom talk into her phone, then looked toward Victor's car. At almost the exact same time, my banking app sent a push notification. Unrecognized device attempting to access your account. It was like watching coordinates line up on a map. My mother at my mailbox, Victor in his car outside my building with a laptop. My account pinging me that someone was trying to break in. I hit screen record on my phone and let it run. Later, I pulled the logs from my bank's website showing the time, IP address, and failed login attempt. The timestamps matched the Ring footage down to the minute. I sent everything to Elalina, the videos, the logs, the IC3 report confirmation. She didn't text back this time. She called and her voice was sharper than I had ever heard it. "This isn't just harassment anymore," she said. "This is attempted identity theft. They're not just pushing you, they're breaking the law." The next day, with her help, I filed a formal police report and updated my complaint with the FBI's cyber unit. It felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, but I kept replaying the image of my mother at my mailbox and Victor hiding in his car like a teenager trying to steal Wi-Fi. Whatever this was, it stopped being family drama the moment they tried to put their hands on the money my father left me by pretending to be me. I had spent months feeling like I was always one step behind their schemes. Now, for the first time, I had something they couldn't spin away with tears or guilt. Hard, ugly digital proof. And that was the moment this stopped being a private war and turned into a case a judge would have to look at with my mother and her perfect new life under the harshest light possible. I always thought courtrooms only looked like that on TV, all polished wood and heavy air. But the real one in downtown San Diego felt even heavier, like the walls themselves had seen too many people lie and break down and pretend they were sorry. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Elena, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the flat screen across from the judge's bench. That was where my life was about to play in high definition. My front door, my mailbox, my inheritance, and the people who decided they deserved it more than I did. On the other side of the room, my mom sat next to Victor. Her hair done, makeup perfect, outfit carefully chosen to scream responsible citizen instead of woman who tried to get into her daughter's accounts. Their lawyer was a different guy this time, older, more polished, the kind of man who probably believed he could talk anyone into anything. Mia and Ethan were in the second row behind them, dressed like this was a school assembly. They would not be testifying, but they could not pretend they did not know why their parents were here. When the judge walked in, everyone stood. I felt my knees wobble slightly, like they were remembering that they used to belong to a kid, not someone about to listen to her own mother be described as a criminal.